ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome our Fall 2019 Common Reading author, Laura McBride.
Now I want to use the mic on me and not this one. Are you getting both? Oh, you took care of all that. Yes. Oh, you guys are professionals. A little housekeeping from me. I agree that your phone should be on silence, but if you want to take pictures or you do any sort of social media, just tag me. I want to be part. Of course, I'd like to start by thanking Professors Kay Brown and Tanya Northerner and Sean Payne. Sean and Kay drove me from the Nashville airport last night, so their workday ended about 11 p.m. I want to thank everyone involved in the Common Reading program. You have, I'm not going to stand right behind that podium. Can you hear and see me just as well from here? Okay. You have an amazing program here, amazing Common Reading program that has received deserved national recognition. And as someone who spent years working as a nonprofit advocate and for community organizing, I know the care and commitment it takes to create a program like that. And that kind of care is what changes the world. Even if there is no way to ever trace all the ripples you are making in the water of this community's history. And so thank you. And also, before I get started with what I wanted to say, I just want to tell you that I'm in love with Owensboro Community and Technical College. So of course, I went on the internet and I sleuthed, who you were. And I was looking it up. I kept saying, oh, I want to do this in my college. I also teach in a community college, as Kay said. I'm an English teacher. You are so lucky to have an engaged and forward-thinking institution here as your school. And I'm happy for you. And I hope we do some of the things that you do. I'm also honored to have been invited here and to share We Are Called to Rise with you. That's the biggest thing I have to say. It's an honor, and thank you. Community colleges are both profession and passion for me. If our national education system were a family, then community colleges would be our middle child. I'm a middle child too. The baby of the family is K through 12 education, and like adored last children everywhere, they are loved. Because what's not to love about kindergartners, or parents reading with their kids in the hallway, or field trips to the chocolate factory, and spelling bees, and cross-country teams, and debate championships, and high school proms? The oldest children are the universities, with their research grants, and their publications, and their high-powered foundations, and of course here in Kentucky, a national basketball championship or two. Even though, of course, I'm UNLV. And a little bit Duke. I'll have that fight. Somewhere in the middle are the community colleges, offering an utterly varied education to the widest mix of students. All ages, all levels, all educational backgrounds, all sorts of reasons for being here in school. Many of you are here for the practical purpose of getting a specific training in a specific career. And many others are searching for what you are going to do or become. All of us are looking for connections to the human experience across time. And all of us are figuring out what it means to live life well. As middle children, community colleges operate in a quiet anonymity that reminds me of Robert Hayden's poem about his father, called Those Winter Sundays. Sundays, too, my father got up early, the poet writes, and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. And no one ever thanked him, Hayden laments. What did I know, he concludes, of love's austere and lonely offices? as a faculty member in a community college, and someone who has observed hundreds, if not thousands, in the system. I want to give tribute to everyone studying and working here. I believe that at community colleges, many people are learning and working with a lot of love. I'm grateful every single day for the chance to be with students whose varied experiences have opened up my life in so many ways. I didn't go to community college myself. My family didn't have many resources, but I was given a scholarship. Exactly 40 years ago, last month, I waved goodbye to my family. I boarded an airplane, the first one in my family to do so, and flew to a place that seemed utterly exotic, California, to start school. In thinking about coming here, I started to think about myself. Many of you are older than 18, but I started to think of myself in college. I was 18. I was thoroughly naive, and I was utterly mindless. It was my first experience living with anyone other than my brothers and sisters. And looking back, I was also remarkably uncivil. I took an 8 o'clock class 4 days a week the entire year. An 8 o'clock class, I just did it so I could get school out of the way fast. But I am not, and I was not, a morning person, and I happily slept through my alarm and all of its snooze alerts day after day. And my roommate, who wouldn't have dreamed of signing up for an 8 o'clock class, and who does not get up before 8:30 a.m. to this day, she got up out of bed, crossed the room, and hit the snooze bar for me a few times before finally getting up out of the bed and physically dragging me out so I would make it to class. We didn't know each other when we were assigned to be roommates, and we did not easily become friends. I wonder why. But in the immense self-centeredness of my youth, I ignored her gentle requests that I not take an 8 o'clock class every quarter, that I wake up to my alarm, that I get out of bed for myself. I didn't pay any attention to this at all. I let her wake me up for most of a year. That was mindless and uncivil behavior, and I'm still ashamed of it. What's worse is that when I dig deeper into that relationship and everything that was going on in my first year of being in college, my mindlessness and incivility went much deeper. I felt uncomfortable at that school. It was a Catholic school in Northern California. And I was Catholic and had attended Catholic schools, but I was otherwise not very similar to much of the student body. I grew up in a poor neighborhood in a small city, and my family was both intellectual and devout. I had been more or less sheltered from popular culture. My family didn't have a television, we didn't go to the movies, we didn't listen to popular music, and of course there was no internet, no cell phone, no computers, no social media. It was a narrow world, but I didn't know it. My parents were lovely people. They were large-minded by nature. They were not at all authoritarian. Catholic family, we attended Mass every day. But my dad used to make jokes about the Pope. So I thought, even though I lived in this very homogeneous place, I thought I lived among rebels. And when I went off to university, I didn't understand that I was going into a very different sort of Catholic culture. My fellow students had attended those large private high schools that always win the state basketball and football championships. They were the children of doctors and lawyers. Many were wealthy, sophisticated, and traveled. I had never heard the music they played on their record players. I hadn't seen the movies or TV shows they talked about. I didn't know the names of any celebrities. I showed up there with my flannel shirts and my overalls in California, with my 2 pairs of shoes and my 1 pair of shorts, which I wore with knee socks, and it was not sexy, and my hair carefully cut by my mother. And my roommate, Well, she didn't feel very comfortable either. She was the only Jewish student on campus. She was from a prominent family, and she had lost her father to a heart attack a year before. What I saw was an exceptionally beautiful girl whose hair was professionally cut and styled, who wore tight-fitting capri jeans in Easter egg colors and low-cut V-neck tops with lots of good diamond necklaces and gold and earrings. She had a dozen pairs of 4-inch heels in an array of rainbow colors. She had her own car, and she was hoping that we could buy matching sheet and comforter sets for our dorm room. But I didn't know what a sheet and comforter set was, and I'd spent part of my summer making a quilt for my bed. She brought a stereo to campus and a television, and we agreed that she could use my closet since I didn't really need it. Within hours of her arrival on campus, our room was filled with men, eager to help her out. Men was another thing I didn't know a lot about. And it stayed filled with men all year long. The first week, it was filled with students who might never have seen such a glamorous girl. She really was something. But most of the year, it was filled with the young black men who played on the school's basketball team. They were tall and wore cologne and spoke in an urban dialect I hadn't heard before. They showed up about 3 o'clock every afternoon to watch a soap opera called General Hospital on her television. And they hung around for the next couple of hours, 3, 4, 5 men, 6.5, 7 feet tall, chewing the fat with my 5 foot 1-inch roommate. Those men were kind to me and tried to socialize me in the ways of my new world. They encouraged me to wear my hair in a new way, to try some makeup, to get rid of the flannel shirt and the overalls. And to all of this, I reacted by fleeing. I made a little group of friends, and I spent my time in their dorm rooms, or in the library, or outside. My friends all agreed that I had been assigned the worst roommate on campus. I mean, what was she doing with all those men, all those black men? Why were her heels so high? How much jewelry did she own? What I didn't see was the lonely girl who felt out of place in this Catholic school, who didn't know she would be the only Jewish student on campus. A girl who was mourning the death of a beloved father. I didn't see the girl who could make friends with people who were different than she was, who was comfortable with people who didn't share her background, her religion, or her skin color. And but for an unusually wise and direct residential hall counselor, I would never have seen her. Halfway through that year, that counselor called me into her room. I loved Sharon. She was and still is quite a special person. And I was pretty sure that we agreed on most important. Sure, she understood how unfair my roommate match had been to me. Imagine my shock when she called me out instead. When she told me there was no one on our floor who had behaved more miserably to her roommate than I had. When she told me that Jill had made repeated and generous offers of friendship, and that I had not only rejected every one, I had done so coldly. I'm 58 years old, and I have never been so thoroughly dressed down in my life. And I deserved it. I am to this day grateful for it. Because it was the first time that I accepted that I could be wrong even when I was certain I was right, and even when there were people happy to tell me I was right. The nice ending to this story is that my roommate and I did become close friends. We are still close to this day. And for me, that roommate selection, made so wisely by some stranger, was the beginning of becoming who I was truly meant to be, and of living a life that is so much richer than I might have had. And that's what I wish for all of you in your college lives. The world has changed a lot in the 40 years that separate our experiences. If my childhood was marked by the effort it took to learn something new, to even know that there was something new to be learned, your world is marked by the difficulty in knowing what you should choose to read, to see, to absorb, to consider. In a world where information, visual and audio, raw or shaped, is blindingly abundant. I don't know what that means. I know it's different. I know our journeys through this earth unfold differently. And perhaps, if we're all willing, we could share our experiences and learn from each other. At my own college, I sometimes begin my composition classes by asking my students what writing is. And the answer that I want them to give me is communication. And afterwards, I occasionally call out in an annoying teacher way, "What is writing?" And they learn to respond, "Communication." My purpose in this small ritual is to remind students to think about their reader as they write. And when I was writing We Are Called to Rise, I was always thinking about what your experience would be as you read it. I always meant to communicate with readers, but I didn't know that they would communicate with me. They do. I get emails and Facebook messages and tweets from people all over the world. They pop up unbidden at 3 in the morning or on a bad day or when I'm right in the middle of something important, or so important, and they often carry compliments or insights and very often stories of their own. There are the mothers who write about their sons with PTSD. There was the husband who wrote me that his wife liked to listen to the children in the playground like my character Avis does. And then he said that they had been married for 60 years. And then at the very end he said, she passed away last week. There was a young man from Australia, who was really amazing. He told me he was a racist. He belonged to a white supremacist group. And I don't know how or why he read We Are Called to Rise. But he told me that he couldn't stop thinking about Bosch Keane, and it was making him feel bad. There was the nurse reading the book all night long as she sat by the bed of her dying patient. She wrote me. There was the mother who'd lost her 12-year-old son to cancer, and she told me that reading helped her live in mourning. There was a 28-year-old woman who'd been waiting months for a lung transplant in an apartment far from her home but near the hospital, reading books. She wrote that We Are Called to Rise gave her a big feeling, and that those big feelings are what make life worth living. We continued to write back and forth for the last 2 years of her life, and I think nearly every day of how much she wanted her chance at the ordinary hours that we can so easily take for granted. Receiving these surprising, generous, intimate notes from strangers has been the most amazing part of becoming a writer. If I could have chosen We Are Called to Rise to do anything in this world, it would have been that. It would have been to touch some readers, to leave some readers with the sense that their experiences had been partially expressed in words, that the deepest emotional components of our lives, the things we cannot find the best words for ourselves, are shared by others. My mother used to say that a novel is just as good a place to get the truth as anywhere else. And William Wordsworth believed that poetry might soothe the wounds of the violent Revolutionary War period he had witnessed. There are many reasons to value literature, but that one of them is that sometimes the right story can help us through. We Are Called to Rise is set in the city where I've lived nearly all of my adult life, Las Vegas. Las Vegas is a sui generis place. While it's just like everywhere else, It's nothing like everywhere else. And in our family, we tell this story to explain that. I have a daughter named Leah, and she played a lot of soccer when she was growing up. And the soccer fields where she practiced were on the other side of an old highway. And that highway is lined with strip clubs and pornographic joints. It's a really seedy road. And honestly, there are a lot of roads like that in Las Vegas, and I didn't pay very much attention to her route to soccer. But when she was about 13 years old, she had to write a speech about her motto for living. She said she had seen this motto written out on a neon sign that she had passed hundreds of times on her route back and forth to soccer practice. She understood the motto to mean that one should live life freely and boldly and honestly. She stood right in front of her dad and I, and she said, "My motto is live nude." So that's our family motto. I am lucky to live in Las Vegas, a place filled with people from all over the world who came for all sorts of reasons. It's a young town, not yet clearly divided into one group or another, the rich, the poor, these newcomers, those. And it's a place in which one regularly witnesses the power of second chances. I did not want to live my life there. I wanted to live in a place that reveled in art and learning and intellectual pretentiousness, maybe Paris. Or else I just wanted to go back home to eastern Washington State. I didn't get what I wanted, but in so many ways I'm the richer for having been shaken loose, both from the safe and small world that I grew up in and the particular larger world I might have chosen. I'm lucky to have lived among people I would not have known to befriend, to have loved people who believe things I don't believe, who live in ways I do not live, who have experienced events I cannot quite imagine. These are the things that have taught me what love and friendship actually are. When I wrote We Are Called to Rise, I was just beginning to understand the ways in which Las Vegas had enriched my life. My oldest child, that soccer player, had gone away to college on the East Coast, and her experience there, the way she was not behind her peers because she had been in Las Vegas's chaotic public school district, or because she had grown up with naked women shaking their behinds from every other billboard. My daughter, that Vegas kid, wasn't stunted by this experience. Instead, she was uniquely positioned to live in the 21st century. She'd never been on a team or at a birthday party in which any family looked very much like any other. She'd always known that one friend might go to religious services on Sunday, and another on Saturday, and a third on Friday. So much of 21st century reality is her native land. And I guess this has changed my view of how the world might work. My life has taught me that the instinct to turn inward, to form like-minded groups, is an instinct we might resist. Nearly 300 years ago, during the Enlightenment period that gave us democracy and the United States and a system of justice based on innately held human rights, many people believed that humans were put on the earth to perfect it. Their idea was that God created the world and then created human beings to perfect that world. These ideas are closely related to the concept of humans as stewards of our environment. And they were related to democracy because democracy was one of the ways that the world would become a better place. From primitive times to the present, Enlightenment thinkers saw our history as a progression from worse to better. Reasoned choices would bring us ever closer to a divine ideal. I think of those thinkers when I think about how humans form groups, how we identify who is us, who is them. Living in chaotic boomtown Las Vegas has persuaded me that while it may feel natural for us to form groups based on similarities, just as it might have felt natural for early human beings to privilege people who were stronger, physically stronger, over people who were physically weaker, perhaps we are actually progressing in the manner we are intended to progress, resist forming groups this way. We all need other people. We all need people we can trust. But our folks do not have to be like us. That's my Vegas revelation. We can form our necessary groups with people who don't share our backgrounds, our ideas, our political views, our religious beliefs, even some of our key values. We can form them just as fellow humans. I think this is the way forward. A few years back, I had lunch with a New York State community college student who had won an essay contest for We Are Called to Rise. She told me her family's story of rising. She grew up on a dead-end road, and the mother of another family who lived on that road was killed in a car accident. Her husband became an alcoholic, and the woman's 7 children were taken away by Children's Protective Services. 4 families who lived on that road, including the student's own, decided to share foster parenting responsibilities for those 7 siblings. Imagine that. Imagine 4 unrelated families committed to staying on the same street and raising someone else's 7 children to adulthood. She kept calling it a dead-end road. And I kept thinking, wow, that was a live-end road. There's a character in my novel who's a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate for children. I know that you had an event with some CASA people last month. The CASA in my story says this about her choice to get involved. Her name is Roberta. The way I see it, nothing in life is a rehearsal. It's not preparation for anything else. There's no getting ready for it. There's no waiting for the real part to begin. This is it. And if you wait too long to figure that out, to figure out that we are the ones making the world, we are the ones to whom all the problems and all the possibilities for grace now fall, then you lose everything. You're one shot at this world. I get that this one small life is all we have for whatever it is that we are going to do, and I want in. I look out at you, community college students, Owensboro, Kentucky. I look out at you, and I hope you want in. Because we need you in this world. We need your hearts, your brains, your ideas, your experiences, your knowledge. And there aren't any rehearsals. There's just this one life. We're all in it. Not one of us with a manual about how to do it. The Latin word for manual comes from the word hand. And perhaps we don't need manuals if we'll all just offer each other a hand. We are each other's manuals for life. It can be very hard to know if we are living what the poet Mary Oliver has called our one wild and precious life well. When I write, I'm thinking about the big questions. I'm trying to conceptualize our role on this earth. I'm trying to understand why so many cruel and unfair things happen. And I'm trying to make sense of individual lives that are simultaneously precious beyond measure and utterly trivial in the scale of history. In the end, I'm someone who believes that our actions matter. We may not be able to change an outcome that is tragic. we may not be able to make an inequitable situation fair. We may not have control, but we do have power. And much of our power rests in the smallest choices we make, choices for which we will never know the impact. At the end of my novel, the judge says something about this. Let's see if I can find it. He says, "But if sometimes an unspeakable horror arises from the smallest error, I choose to believe that it's possible for an equally unimaginable grandeur to grow from the tiniest gesture of love. I choose to believe it works both ways, that great terror is the result of 1,000 small but evil choices, and great good is the outcome of another 1,000 tiny acts of care." Going to college, becoming educated, investing in your future are acts of care. The choice to have a campus-wide conversation about a novel is an act of care. The choice to participate in that conversation, to risk exposure, to consider changing, those are others. When you set out to do a right thing, when you try to make the community around you a little bit better, you are part of making the world right, of making it whole again. The Hebrew phrase is tikkun olam, to heal the world. The tiniest baby knows the difference between a loving touch and an indifferent one. And we too know the difference. Every one of us knows when we are doing something that somehow repairs the world, no matter how small it is. Every single time, we know when we are acting out of love or out of hate, when we are acting out of care or out of fear. I believe that our goal should just be to tip the scale a little. Not to do some grand, amazing thing, not to solve problems too big for us to grasp, but simply to daily practice the actions that tip the scales the right way. A little more love, a little more care, a little less hate, a little less fear. A young woman I know ran a weekend retreat for her college for 3 years. The purpose of the retreat was to bring together people of different backgrounds, identities, and beliefs, and to give them a chance to share their experiences with each other. I asked that young woman what she would say to you, and she suggested this: lean into discomfort. Here in your own community, on your own campus, lean in when someone, some group, some idea, some event makes you uncomfortable. Entertain the possibility that your own certainties, your own fears, your own ideas might not be as right or as complete as you thought. Perhaps they're just not as generous or as true as you are capable of being. Who knows? Perhaps one day, this will be the moment when you say you begin to become the person you were truly meant to be. At the very end of my novel, the 8-year-old child says, "I'm the one who did the small good thing first." And it's that child's voice that I try to keep in my mind. Thank you. I don't have a watch and I don't have the time. I do have a short reading for you, but what I think is way more fun is if you ask me questions and I answer. Are you comfortable with that? If you get bored and you can't come up with any questions, then I will read to you. Who has the first one? Oh, by the way, I like hard questions. You don't have to be nice to me. I'm a grown-up.
Have you always wanted to write?
Have I always wanted to write? I can't see who asked me that question. Way back there, have I always wanted to write? I decided when I was a pretty small child that in my big family I was the writer. I don't know what that was based on. You know, I like stories. In my family, stories were privileged pretty high. My grandmother could tell a really funny story. My mother loved novels. She was part of a book group 70 years ago. And the one thing she absolutely always did was go to her book group. So I wasn't writing every day and always had a bunch of books. I just always had it in my idea that this is the thing that I valued most and wanted to do. And when I turned 50, I had a one-semester sabbatical from my job. My sabbatical project fell through because it was the middle of the recession. And I decided to write a novel to put in the shelf in the closet. And that's We Are Called to Rise.
Since there's like so many like characters in this book, did you ever like get confused yourself about like what like who was like saying who and like?
Did you feel a little confused when you were reading? A little bit. He asks, since there were so many characters and storylines, did I ever get confused in the novel? I just reread the novel for the first time since I wrote it in 2012, and I didn't get confused. I realized I thought I was thinking about the reader. I realized that the reader's experience at the beginning of the novel is a little bit confusing, more confusing than I think I knew it was. And then it comes together. And I did want to create that experience. I didn't want to give you everything at the start. I wanted you to have to kind of work for it. But I did realize you do. Did I ever get confused? No, because for me, nobody in that book is anybody I know or is particularly like anybody I know. I really wanted to keep that separate. But it was a fully imagined world. And so actually I know books and books more about all of them. So in the same way it would be difficult for you to get confused about your family or your friends. I didn't feel confused. Yeah, you.
How do you begin a book like this? I mean, do you have an end at the site where you've got all these characters that pull together in this one spot? Or do you take a character at a time?
I don't take a character at a time. I pretty much wrote the novel exactly in the order that you read it, though I did go back and edit it, and most importantly, I went back and added Roberta in later. But pretty much it was exactly in the order that I wrote it, and I switched from character to character at the end of each chapter.
You don't know where you're going with it?
I'm now on my fourth novel, and the process hasn't been the same every time. But for that book, I decided to take that story at the center, the one that happens right in the middle of the page, the central story between the police officer and the woman. And that was going to be the genesis of everything I was going to do. And I had in my mind, structurally, that I would put that in the middle of the book, and I would have to work back to how did they get there, yep, and then how did that, and all I knew about this end of it was that I was not going to leave Boschkeem without hope. So I didn't want to write a Pollyanna story, so I don't think we know that Boschkeem is going to be okay at the end of this book, but he has a chance of being okay. And that was the thing I really knew. There is some way that I'm going to solve this problem so that that little boy has a chance. And so I really had in my mind, the thing is that so much happens as you're writing. You think you know right where you're going, but then all this other stuff starts happening, and they have these past lives, and all of a sudden Avis has a child that died when she was, just things start happening. I was going to write about Charlene, Avis's mother, but I killed her off. And then when I killed her off, because I just needed to take care of some other bit of business, I killed her off. I thought, I'm going to have to go back and fix that. When I bring Charlene in, I'm going to have to unkill her. But I never went back and fixed it. So as I was writing all the way up to that climactic moment, I was just every single second furiously thinking, how am I getting back down to the end where Boschkeem is okay? And I spun out scenario after scenario after scenario after scenario before I ended up with the one that I chose. And I remember the day I did. I belonged to a give group, which is just 12 women, and for the last 15 or 20 years we get together once a month, and we used to go have lunch together and stuff, so now we throw a little bit of money in the pot, and then we give that money to somebody. We try to give it to somebody who maybe lost their job or has a sick child or, whatever. So I'd gone to my give group, and I was suffering over my novel, and it was a CASA who was there, and the person whose turn it was to decide where the money went that month, she wanted to give the money to CASA, so she had a CASA there. And I remember this poor woman was speaking to us, and I was like jumping out of my seat, because I said, a CASA, a CASA, a CASA, that she could help me. I just had to get home and write. And I know the woman thought I was really odd, but now I give her credit. Maybe she feels better about that. Did you also have a question?
No, I was trying to help him out.
Oh, his hand wasn't big enough. Anybody else? Yes.
How do you know when you have that story that you've made all the changes to your novel?
I think the answer is I don't absolutely know that. And when I wrote this book, I had written a novel once before that never went anywhere, years before, but I had a couple of ideas for what a really good story would be. And then when it came time to write it, I didn't want to write any of those stories, and instead I started working with this story that what I thought was a really bad idea. And the way I started it is I said, well, I'm just going to do this for a few weeks, and then I'll be in the groove of writing, and then I'll go back to a real story. And then how do you know it's done? Well, it's never done in the sense it's really painful for me to reread because there are so many changes I might make. But the way that you know it's done for me, and this has happened each time, at a certain point, I'm writing forward, I'm interested, I'm engaged, I have a problem I'm trying to solve, maybe it's the ending, there's always a problem, there's always something hard to do. That solution finally comes to me, and every single time there's this moment where I say, I really tried not to be vain, and I really, 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 really work hard to address the way that the world can help us make us feel that we're more important than we are individually. But there's this one part when I'm writing where it comes to me so whole and so great and so perfect that I say to myself, oh, please God, don't die before I get this down on paper. By the time I've got it down on paper, I'm like, well, nobody cares too much. They absolutely had to get down. But so when that sort of feeling comes, and I'm just writing furiously, furiously, furiously to the end, I'm done. And what difference does it make if there would be someone else who would say another ending is done? That's my ending. And it's very, very sure. It feels very solid. Thank you. It's an interesting question. Somebody else? Oh, you want me to read to you? Seriously? I've been talking and talking and talking. Okay.
Have you ever had a publisher, such as Simon Schuster, say, we're not too crazy about this part, we wish you would rearrange this storyline or character?
My editor she has a very light touch. And so with this book and with my second book in the Midnight Room, no, she never wants to change one word. I mean, she might say something, but she doesn't say much that way. She's a very positive kind of editor. Sometimes I have a little fantasy about an editor that would push me, though I don't know how I would actually take that. So I haven't had that experience. I have had work rejected, just full on. The whole thing is terrible. They're wrong, but yeah.
Has anybody talked to you about a movie?
For We Are Called to Rise, someone contacted me before it came out. And, long story short, my agent felt that I would get a better offer after it came out, and I never did. I was so absolutely brand new green. I don't even blame myself, because what would anybody do but ask their agent? And my agent was trying to give the best possible advice. And that's just what happened. But that person didn't want it back after nobody else wanted it. She was trying to get in early, and then when there wasn't that big rush, wasn't interested anymore. But thank you. Thank you. My friends all have all the actors and actresses picked out. Of course, I can't keep an actor's name in my head, so I never know who it is. Another question? Would you like me to read? Oh, you have a question. Emma. Oh. Well, the title, as you see in the front of the book, comes from a poem by Emily Dickinson. And how I actually chose the title is I had a different working title. And my working title was Up Your Heart. And it came from an Elvis Presley line, just open up your heart and let this fool rush in. And instead of saying open up your heart, I used up your heart, because I liked that sort of play on up your heart and a little bit up your heart, because I thought that was kind of Las Vegas. And I will tell you that my agent and my editor and everybody hated that title. They hate it every time. I name all my books Up Your Heart, and they say every time we are never going to use that title. I had a storybook publication tale. So what never happens to any writer is that they get published easily without having to work at it. That never happens. And I didn't even intend to put my book out for publication because I already knew that was never going to happen. But somebody I knew said, I know an agent, why don't you just ask her about it? And I asked that agent about it, and ultimately she became my agent and sold the book. And as it happened, she did that very, very quickly. But before she did that very quickly, she had the book for a couple of months. And I couldn't really tell if she was reading it. I couldn't really tell if she was interested. She would occasionally email me a question. And I was just on pins and needles thinking, oh, wow, is it possible that I will get an agent? This is so exciting. And I could hardly stand waiting to know if I was going to get this agent. So it was a Monday morning. It was like 6:30 in the morning. I was teaching an 8 o'clock poetry class, a fabulous time to teach poetry. And because I still had this idea that I'd get my day done quickly that I had all the way from the time I was 18 years old. I don't teach at 8 o'clock anymore. But anyway, I was teaching an 8 o'clock poetry class, and I opened up my email, and it was this woman, this agent. And she said, okay, we're ready to go. I need a new title and a bio in an hour. Well, it was 6:30 for me, but it was 9:30 for her in New York. And I had to get to my 8 o'clock class. I had to get my kids to school. I hadn't had any breakfast. For sure, I wasn't showered or dressed. I mean, it's only 6:30. I like to leave at the last minute. So I didn't want to do anything that would ruin my relationship with her. So a bio was easy. There wasn't that much to say. Boom, 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 3 sentences, had the bio. And then a new title. Are you kidding? It takes forever to think of a title. So I opened up the poetry book. I was teaching a poem by Emily Dickinson, a poem by John Donne, and a poem by Robert Frost. And I pulled one line from each one of their poems, and I sent it to her. And I did look for a line that would maybe fit the story, but not very hard. And because I knew that we would talk about this for months and months and months before we would decide if she was even going to represent me. So that afternoon, I got another email, and it said, okay, I love We Are Called to Rise. The bio's fine. And I have a conversation scheduled. I have a call scheduled with your editor tomorrow morning. I've sold the book. It was amazing. And then they never changed it. And if there's time, I'll tell you, I feel really lucky to have this little tiny association to Emily Dickinson, an absolutely amazing, fantastic poet who was so brave in her time, because she was writing poetry that nobody liked and that nobody who was respected as a poet, mostly men, thought was good. And she was making up her own grammar and making up her own spelling and making up her own ideas about the subject of poetry. And she was so brave in that she wrote thousands of poems and kept them hidden and occasionally would show one to somebody who said, it's no good, but she kept doing it. So I love that connection to Emily Dickinson. I sometimes feel like the title, I think it's a beautiful title. I do. I love it. I also sometimes feel like it's a little bit, it's a little bit like I'm telling people what to do. And I don't love that part of it. But otherwise, I do. That was a long answer to a simple question. I don't know what our timing is. Are we, one more question? Does anybody have one? Oh, wait, someone back there hasn't had one. Go ahead.
I just been going to sounds like, so you're still teaching.
Yeah. Yes.
You have a family.
Yes, they're getting big.
Do you sleep? Like, what do you do?
I know. It is super hard. I do not write every day. I write when I know what I'm going to do, and then I dive in. And my college has been really receptive about twice they allowed me to teach online, fully online for a semester. And in that scenario, I teach online late at night and I write during the day. When I'm on campus teaching, I can edit, but I can't really get all the way into a novel. I try because I like teaching on campus, because it's my job to teach on campus. But for me, it's pretty hard to cleave those two people apart. And I wrote We Are Called to Rise. My son was a freshman, and my youngest was a freshman in high school. So it has dovetailed with those years when life gets so much easier. But I have traveled and toured a lot, which is such, but this might be my 150th away event in the last 6 years. And that is a lot of travel to add in. And at first I said, I can't do it. But when I was writing in the Midnight Room, so I'd get on a plane and I'd say, those headphones do not come on, that pillow does not come out until I have written for an hour. And I'd get into a hotel room, I'd be so tired, I'd want to just scream, and I'd say, those covers do not come down until I've written for an hour. And it turns out that that's not a great writing experience, but it gets you words on a page. And words on a page is all you need. If you can get all the way through a draft, students, remember this, if you can get all the way through a draft, you are golden. You can turn that into something else when you go back to revise and polish. What you can't do is make up words that you never wrote down. So it's hard. And I don't have little kids anymore. I wrote one novel when I had little kids, and they luckily lived through it. Because I am really in a bubble, really. I think that's all of our time. And I just thank you so very much.